Hello, welcome to the Witch in the Woods, and today we're going to talk about Lammas. So Lammas, or Lughnasadh, is the celebration of the first harvest. I tend to call it Lughnasadh myself. Lammas is the Christian festival, although in the early Anglo-Saxon church there was very little that could differentiate a Saxon and a pagan ceremony. But I like Lughnasadh, and I think when we study Lughnasadh we find a lot more symbolism about the celebration of this season than in the Christian tradition. So both celebrate the harvest festival and specifically the harvesting of the wheat and grain from the fields. It also celebrates the first fruits of the season, and it is the end of the hay harvest, when the hay was brought in and would feed the animals over the winter and also provide straw for bedding. It's the time when blackberries appear on the bushes, and one small ritual is to eat the first blackberry you see, and the blackness of the berry is supposed to help you face your shadow as we go into the dark half of the year. It's halfway between the summer solstice and the autumn equinox, but it is the turning towards harvest, the turning towards the cooler season. And to eat the fruits at this time was to be able to ingest the shadow side and face the darkness ahead of us. So in the Celtic countries, specifically in Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, this time was celebrated with games, and these were called the Games of Lugh. The name Lughnasadh actually means the assembly of Lugh. So these games were celebrated by trials of prowess and strength and athletic competitions. Lugh, of course, is the sun god in all his strength. There were also marriages and religious ceremonies and the sacrifice of a bull. It was also traditional to climb hills and mountains. Can you hear that plane? That's going over my house. Very low. So there is an underlying theme of strength and competition, and Lugh, who was the mighty sun god, was in his most powerful aspect, with August being the hottest month of the year. So Lughnasadh means the assembly of Lugh, and it survived into the 20th century under other traditions and other names, and adopted by the Christian church. Specifically, it was known as Garland Sunday, Bilberry Sunday, Mountain Sunday and Crom Dubh Sunday. There was also a tradition of calling it Reek Sunday, which was when the Catholics would climb the sacred mountain of, I'm not saying this right, Cragpatrick, which was a holy mountain where Patrick was supposed to have spent some time in pilgrimage seeking visions. He spent 40 nights there, 40 days there, and as a result of this, Christians now choose the last Sunday in July to take a pilgrimage barefoot up the mountain and climb to the heights, where they circle around the mountain sunwise in a specific way. They circle the cairn of Lugh 7 times. Then they circle around the perimeter of the mountain 15 times. Then they circle around what they call Patrick's Bed, or Liber Padraig, 7 times, and then around the ancient cairn of Reilig Mary, which is Mary's Cemetery, 7 times. So in this we can see some ancient traditions, not only of visiting holy places and regarding mountains and hills as holy places, but we also see how Christian tradition often overlaps with earlier ceremony and earlier ritual. Also, it was a tradition to hold battles and contests at what were called the funeral games of Cheltu. Now, Cheltu, and I apologise if I'm not saying that right, was either the mother or the foster mother of Lugh, and it was said that she died of exhaustion after clearing all the plains of Ireland, so that that was the biggest shooting star I ever saw. Wow. Yeah, that was strange. Anyway, so she died of exhaustion after clearing the plains of Ireland for agriculture. So here we can see, I'm still gobsmacked. Oh, what was that? So here we can see perhaps this analogy with the grain goddess, or the earth mother goddess, who has to die and be sacrificed in order to feed the Irish and humanity. Wow, that was such an amazing comedy falling star. I don't know what that was. So these traditional games involved the cutting of the first corn and then taking it to a high place, a sacred hill or a sacred mountain, and burying it in the earth. Also at this time they would bury bilberries, which were the first fruits, in the earth, and this returning to the earth was a mark of continuing fertility of the soil. In the days before combine harvesters, the cutting of the first and last sheaves of grain was undertaken with much more reverence and ceremony. It was traditional to cut with a scythe, and therefore either the first cut or the last cut was considered particularly sacred. There was a tradition of cutting the first sheaf of corn and then returning it to the earth. There was the tradition of cutting all the corn down in the field but leaving the last sheaf remaining, at which all the people would gather around it and throw their scythes at it at the same time and all cut it down together. Of course, we've inherited the story or the song of John Barleycorn, which perhaps relates to an earlier tradition of killing the corn god, the grain gods. As the song goes, John Barleycorn must die. This is perhaps some relation to a very old or older Anglo-Saxon custom, and it was reckoned that John Barleycorn was actually an Anglo-Saxon mythical god called Beola. So at the Lughnasadh festival there was also the tradition of a sacred meal of the first corn and bilberries. There was also the sacrifice of an old bull and replacing him with a new bull. Also a ritual dance or Lammas play took place, which enacted the saving of a goddess. And this also relates to the figure of Crom Dub, who means dark crooked one, or Crom Cruach as he's also been known. And he is the dark god who jealously hoards his treasure, and his treasure is the grain. But there is the bright sun god Lugh, who rescues his treasure for the benefit of mankind, to feed the people. Sometimes this treasure is also depicted as a goddess who is the goddess Eithne. In many ways, Eithne represents a Persephone figure who has been stolen by the dark underworld gods and must be rescued, again for fertility, to come back to the land. So the burying of the first fruits or the first grains of corn is an act of respect and reverence of returning the fertility back to the earth to ensure its plentiful supply and its continuation. We do not take without giving, and we do not receive without reverence and thanks. So in many ways this is what these festivals are about. In England and in most of Europe it was traditional to make a corn dolly. In many places the corn dolly is made of the last sheaves of corn, and she can be made by the oldest woman in the village. And the corn dolly could also represent the old Earth Mother. She is called in Scotland the Carlin or Carline, and in many ways she is the old woman who is similar to the crone or the cailleach. She is brought home and she is taken to the barn to guard the corn throughout the winter, or also she is brought into the home. In some thoughts, the corn spirit lives in the corn, but with the cutting of the corn he has lost his home and he has nowhere to go. So the corn dolly is made with a hollowed area inside in which the corn spirit can live, be invited into the home for the winter, and then the corn dolly is taken out to the fields again on Plough Sunday of the next season and buried, ploughed back into the earth to ensure continuing fertility. So these corn dollies can be made quite easily, and I'll leave a link below to a YouTube video that I found quite useful in how to make a corn dolly. And brought into the home and decorated with flowers and with ribbons. So it's something we shouldn't let die, and something that is quite easy to do if you're privileged enough to be able to get access to a field and can go and pick some corn, which is quite rare these days. So Lammas is what many people call this Pagan Festival, and Lammas is actually the Christian festival of Lovemas. It comes from the Anglo-Saxon church, but there were many tie-overs between early Anglo-Saxon Christianity and pagan traditions. So the tradition was the first sheaves of corn and the first harvest were made into a loaf of bread, and the loaf of bread would be taken into church to be blessed. It would then be cut into 4 pieces, and the 4 pieces were placed at the 4 corners of the barn to bless the harvest, to bless the grain, and to guard it through the winter. In many ways we are dependent on agriculture, and the Harvest Festival is one of the most important of all of these festivals. You can celebrate this by baking bread, by making corn dollies, by ploughing or returning some offering back to the land. You can decorate your altar with flowers, and you can mark this season by climbing hills or taking a high point, returning to some vantage points where you are closer to the sun and the height of his power. So let's not forget that we are still dependent on agriculture in many ways. Also, we can visit holy wells and holy springs and give thanks for the water which comes from the earth and which blesses the crops. So I hope you found that some interest, and if you have any questions or anything to add, then please let me know in the comments below. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and I hope to speak to you all again soon. Thank you, bye.